traumatic event. When they were recounting their tale to us, they broke down uh, emotionally and were crying a lot and have found it very difficult to recount a lot of what had occurred to them. But they one night were sitting in their hogan, and every traditional Navajo family has what's called a hogan, which is an eight-sided structure that's outside of their main home. And it's a traditional religious structure where all of the family, like ceremonies and special events and stuff like that, are done. Beyond that, every Navajo family typically has a trailer of some kind on the property. That's their main residence where they live. And they typically have other family members that live on the same land or the same acreage, if you will, close to one another. And that was the case with this particular family. And one night they were in their hogan, and all of a sudden they began to hear machine gun fire way off in the distance. Very strange. In fact, they described it, one of the younger males of the family described it as it sounded like miniguns, if people know what those are, that you find on the side of helicopters and things like that. So it's almost like a modern day Gatling gun. And all of a sudden, they began to see light pouring through the cracks because these hogans are made out of their mud hut hogans. And over time, the ceilings crack, and all of a sudden, light began to pour through all of the cracks onto the floor in the hogan. And they began to hear this crazy rumbling, staticky noise. And it really frightened them, and the whole hogan began to shake. And they ran out of the hogan only to see a UFO or a UAP, whatever you want to refer to it as these days, hovering above their property and above the hogan and the trailer and the rest of the property, and was shining this hugely bright light down. And there were aliens literally on the ground running around. They ran into their trailer. The husband grabbed a weapon. They barricaded themselves and called the police. They could hear them running around on the ceiling. They could hear all kinds of stuff going on outside. We later found out that the uncle of the family lived on the property, and in the panic of the moment began to run towards his trailer that was on the same acreage and ran right into one of these creatures, knocking it down onto the ground and him on top of it. And he literally, instinctively, I suppose, began to strangle this thing to death. Now, the couple that owned the property began to break down hysterically when they were telling us all of this. So they end up running into their trailer. They called the police. It was a long time later, after they heard a lot more commotion outside, that the police department actually ends up responding, because this was a pretty remote property. And it takes a long time to get out there. I was amazed at how long it took us. And so they get out there, and they're accompanied by a black SUV. And they could only describe the occupant of the black SUV as being a super soldier like. In fact, they called him, the only thing they could equate it to was that it was what was the movie Universal Soldier, is how the male of the family put it. It was like this Universal Soldier like guy gets out of this SUV, and he's got guns all over him. They couldn't believe how many guns, like six, they counted 6, I believe is what they told us. Wow. And he seemed to be in charge of the other cops that were on scene. And he could hear this couple telling the police officer about the uncle running into this creature. And he looked over at the other trailer, gets in his SUV, drives over to that uncle's trailer, gets out, goes inside, and apparently retrieves something that he then brings outside and puts into the back of the SUV and drives off the property. Now, the police take the report. There was nothing else they could do. They left this family in complete hysterics. And that's when they contacted JC Johnson, and JC contacted me, and we were there the day after that. It was a 1-day delay. So we were there within 48 hours of actually this event taking place. Now, when we got there, the footprints from all of this activity was still all around their property, including 100 tiny little footprints about like that. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. I was just like beside myself in the emotion that these people were having, telling us this whole thing.